For generations, the villagers of Crestwood huddled beneath the shadow of Mount Thunder Peak, ruled by Kael, the storm god. They knew him only through destruction. Roofs ripped away like dried leaves, fields flooded into muddy swamps, ancient oaks splintered like kindling. His tempests were terrifying symphonies of wind and water, seemingly born from silent, inexplicable fury. The people offered desperate prayers and meager sacrifices, but the storms came regardless, leaving behind shattered homes and broken spirits. Kael remained an unseen, terrifying force, his motivations locked away behind the relentless gray curtain of his rage. Children were taught to fear the gathering dark clouds, a sign of his terrible displeasure. Though none could recall what sin they had committed to earn such enduring wrath, his silence felt like the deepest condemnation. Among them lived Elara, a young girl with eyes the color of the troubled sky before a downpour, while others saw only devastation. Elara sensed something else within the storm's fury. She noticed how the fiercest gales seemed to deliberately avoid the oldest, most fragile cottage on the hill, or how lightning never struck the ancient lightning rod atop the crumbling watchtower. She would watch the storms from her small window, not with terror, but with a quiet, puzzling curiosity. The booming thunder didn't sound like anger to her. It resonated more like a deep, sorrowful groan, a sound trapped beneath mountains of unspoken words. She felt a strange pull towards the tempest, a whisper beneath the roar. One oppressive afternoon, the air grew thick and heavy, charged with the familiar, dreadful energy preceding Kael's wrath. The sky bruised purple and green, and the wind began its low, insistent moan through the valley. Villagers scrambled, battening shutters and herding animals into cramped shelters, their faces etched with familiar dread. Elara, however, felt an irresistible urge. Ignoring her mother's frantic calls, she slipped out, drawn towards the highest ridge overlooking the valley, the place closest to the brooding peak. The wind whipped her hair and stung her eyes, but she pressed on, driven by a feeling she couldn't name, a conviction that there was more to the god than rage. She needed to see, to understand the source of the silent storm. As she reached the windswept ridge, the first icy drops stung her skin. Then the heavens truly opened. Rain lashed down in blinding sheets, and thunder cracked directly overhead, shaking the very ground beneath her feet. Through the blinding deluge, Elara saw him, not a vague force, but a towering figure standing at the peak's edge, silhouetted against the violent sky. Kael, his form seemed woven from the storm itself, swirling cloud and crackling energy. His face, turned towards the terrified village below, was contorted not in anger, but in profound, agonizing grief. Tears, indistinguishable from the rain, streamed down his cheeks. His massive hands clenched at his sides, knuckles white, as if physically restraining an unbearable pressure within. His silence wasn't indifference. It was the crushing weight of unspeakable sorrow. Suddenly, a monstrous roar echoed, deeper and more terrifying than any thunder. It came not from the sky, but from deep within the earth. Mount Thunder Peak itself shuddered violently. A jagged fissure ripped open along its flank, spewing smoke and glowing rocks. A colossal landslide, triggered by the pent-up seismic fury, began its catastrophic descent towards Crestwood. It would obliterate everything: homes, fields, lives. In seconds, the villagers, huddled in their flimsy shelters, were utterly unaware of the true, imminent doom rushing towards them. Elara screamed a warning, lost in the tempest, her heart freezing with terror for her family, her friends, her home. Death wasn't coming from the sky. It was roaring up from the ground. In that instant of utter despair, Kael moved. He didn't roar. He simply acted, raising his arms with a gesture that seemed to gather the very essence of the storm. He unleashed not destruction, but salvation. The raging winds, previously chaotic, snapped into a focused, impossibly powerful gale. They screamed across the path of the landslide, not towards the village. The torrential rain, falling in near solid walls, slammed into the cascading rock and mud with unimaginable force. Lightning, brilliant and precise, struck the unstable cliff face above the slide, shattering it and diverting the main flow of debris harmlessly into a deep ravine, away from the sleeping valley below. It was a breathtaking, terrifying display of controlled fury. A dance of devastation wielded like a surgeon's scalpel. The diverted landslide crashed harmlessly into the ravine with a final, earth-shaking thud. The unnatural wind died abruptly. The rain softened to a gentle drizzle, then ceased entirely as the thick clouds parted. Weak sunlight filtered down, illuminating a scene of profound strangeness. Crestwood stood untouched, its thatched roofs glistening wetly below the ridge, however, lay a landscape utterly transformed. A raw, muddy scar where the diverted landslide had passed, trees flattened, earth churned. Elara stood soaked and shivering, staring at the storm god. Kael's shoulders slumped, the immense tension draining from him. He looked exhausted, ancient, his eyes filled with an ocean of weariness and lingering sorrow. Met Elara's, he offered no explanation, no booming pronouncement, only a look that spoke volumes of loneliness and a burden carried for centuries. Slowly, hesitantly, Elara took a small step towards the colossal being. She didn't speak. Words felt too small. Instead, she simply bowed her head, a gesture of profound gratitude and newfound understanding. Kael watched her, the storm clouds in his eyes momentarily clearing. A sigh, softer than a summer breeze yet carrying the weight of ages, escaped him. He didn't vanish in a clap of thunder. He simply dissolved, like mist, warmed by the emerging sun, leaving behind the cleansed air and the quiet dripping of water from the pines. Elara walked back down the ridge. She knew the villagers would see the scarred land and perhaps still whisper of the storm god's rage. But she carried a different truth in her heart. She knew the silent rage was a shield, the thunder a cry of grief, the storm itself a desperate, loving embrace against a far greater darkness. And sometimes, the fiercest protectors are the most misunderstood. Their love written not in gentle words, but in the violent, saving grace of the tempest. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of an unspoken vow to endure,